This is the chapter reading of The Wild Hare's Daughter by Laura Koerber. Prologue. Amy, September of 2032. My mother would never tell me who my dad was, but I found out anyway. In a town of only 800 people, most of them not in the right age range to be my dad, how hard was it going to be? I was about 10 when I figured it out. Mom was pushing her cart slowly down the grocery aisle, just drifting along, looking at packages of rice-a-roni and hamburger helper, while I trailed along behind, bored and daydreaming about flying. Then Mom stopped, froze, and turned to examine the rice noodles that she never buys. I just had time to notice a tall, lean guy with a wild animal look when Mom gave her cart a yank, pivoted it smartly, and suddenly we were trotting away down the aisle, as if seized by a need to escape from all the packaged meals. After she swung into the frozen veggie aisle and slowed down, I asked her, "Who's that guy?" She responded with, "Who?" spoken vaguely, lightly, as if barely aware of my question. I knew from my experience that she wouldn't answer questions about my dad. Another time, this time I was maybe 12, we were out in the grocery store parking lot, and I almost walked smack into him. Mom was shoveling groceries into the trunk, and I was squeezing between vehicles on my way to the front passenger seat when there he was, jumping down from the seat of his pickup. A little white dog yapped from inside his truck. I had just enough time to be surprised that a guy like him had a poodle when he closed the truck door, turned toward me, and we nearly collided. I guess being that close made it impossible for him to ignore me, so he grinned, tipped his baseball cap in an ironic salute, and made a sweeping gesture with his arm, allowing me to pass. I slid by, my nose right up near the front of his t-shirt, and got a lungful of furry animal smell. As I opened our car door, I caught a glimpse of him passing my mom. They definitely made eye contact, and he gave a little nod. Then her mouth closed up tight, and she turned her shoulder to him. I watched to see if he'd look back as he was walking away, but he didn't. That was back before I started flying. I was obsessed with wondering who Daddy Deer was until random incidences of spontaneous levitation changed my perspective. The flying started with a dizzy spell in the bathroom. While brushing my teeth, I saw my face traveling upwards in the bathroom mirror. In a panic, I grabbed for the edge of the sink, but it had dropped down out of reach. I had to lean over, and that's when I saw my feet dangling in the air above the linoleum. It's very weird to see something and just not believe it. As soon as I saw the space between my feet and the floor, I fell. Just dropped, nicking my chin on the edge of the sink on the way down. I ended up in a heap on the floor with blood in my mouth. I was stunned, in pain, and confused. Slowly, I climbed to my feet, using the sink to pull myself up. I listened. No sound from Mom and evil stepdad downstairs. After cleaning my face off and carefully rinsing the blood out of the washcloth, I went back to brushing my teeth while I slowly talked myself into thinking I just had a dizzy spell. Flying wasn't possible, right? Then I went to bed. I dreamed that night of flying. But that was normal for me. I dreamed of flying nearly every night of my childhood. Super realistic dreams that I loved and cherished. But actual flying was something completely different. It happened again the next evening. I just floated gently upwards, hung in the air, and fell as soon as I realized that I was levitating. Luckily, I managed to not bang my chin on the sink on the way down, but I did sit frozen on the floor for a long time, just processing. Wondering if my imagination had really gone on overdrive. Or maybe I had a brain tumor? My heart wanted the flying to be real, but the rest of my nervous system thought I was sick or crazy. I guess anything will start to feel normal if repeated enough. Every night, my body gently floated above the bathroom floor. Bedtime trips to the bathroom became my secret adventure. I loved to hover, knowing that right downstairs, Mom and evil stepdad were going about their boring, stupid lives while I was floating 6 inches above the bathroom floor. I was magical. Yet at the same time, I was terrified. What if I suddenly started floating at school? Like in gym class, everyone staring at me stuck up against the ceiling of the locker room, half dressed with my belly fat on display. Or what if it happened outside the school and I just floated away up into the atmosphere and died? I pictured shocked and excited faces, all looking up as I helplessly drifted away, the faces getting smaller and smaller until I was all alone in the stratosphere, cold and breathless up there in the wild blue yonder, asphyxiating. Besides, it would be a real shock to people to see me fly. I mean, a shock in a not cool way, because if one kind of magic was real, then other kinds could be too. Maybe people really could put curses on each other by sticking pins in a doll. Maybe people really could read each other's minds and learn all kinds of private shit that they shouldn't know. Back in the old days when the belief in magic was widespread, witches got burned at the stake. So, I was paranoid, and flying was my secret, especially in light of the events of the previous year. Something had happened in my town that was impossible to explain without magic. A whole bunch of prisoners just walked right out of jail in broad daylight. One guard got his head bashed in, but that didn't really explain the jailbreak. The prisoners walked right past the other jail cells, got out a locked back door without setting off an alarm, and walked right down Main Street in their bright orange jail uniforms, all without anyone noticing. On top of that, a congressman disappeared and a gun shop guy who was also in the militia got murdered. Lots of townspeople were upset and rumors were rife, and some of the rumors were about supernatural forces in play. Evil stepdad believed that witchcraft was involved. So, before I started flying, I thought the militia was just a bunch of assholes who were spreading rumors about magic to cover up their incompetence. But once I started flying, I saw things differently. Flying meant that magic was real, and therefore it was logical that magic was involved in the jailbreak and the congressman's disappearance. And that meant I was not the only one who had magic. Someone else in my town had magic too. Chapter 1. Bobby. Saturday, September 15th, 2032. It's hard to propitiate a water fairy. They don't like anything scented or anything that isn't biodegradable. What they like best is water. Fresh and clean, of course, but if Lolly caught me buying bottled water, I'd have to propitiate for months. She was really down on plastic. I'd have to propitiate Sally and Charlie too, plus listen to them lecture me. Then the Morrises and Mrs. Reynolds would weigh in, and my whole extended family of non-relatives who lived on my property, supported by my income, would pile on to tell me what an asshole I was. Which they did, all the fucking time, on other topics. So why not when it came to propitiating pissed off water sprites? So I settled for a bottle of bourbon. Couple of shots for Lolly, and the rest for me. I'm not the one who pissed in the lake. That decision made, I headed for the Bear Lake Pharmacy for supplies. I grew up in Bear Lake, Wisconsin, and any trip in town was triggering, as Mrs. Morris would say. She read magazines with lots of interviews with important people, and she picked up catchphrases like, "I have to watch my privilege," or "that's triggering," meaning she was getting negative flashbacks about something. I always had more or less non-stop negative flashbacks whenever I drove into Bear Lake because of having lived there all my life. So on my way to the pharmacy, I drove past the elementary school and got triggered into a memory of the bus dumping us rural kids off at the play yard in the winter. I hated school. I hated being jammed up in the bus next to all the other kids. I hated being all bundled up in layers of sweaters, coats, and mufflers, so that I went from being cold outside to being cooked alive inside the bus. Arnie, my best buddy, my acolyte due to me accidentally enthralling him, was always beside me, and I can still remember the snot dripping down his nose as he thawed out. I probably had snot dripping down my nose too. Civilization sucks. It's better to just stay inside like a bear or stay outside like a deer. To me, every school day was like walking into a trap. As a kid, I knew I would never fit in, but I think Arnie had hopes back then. Remembering being an outcast as a kid triggered me into thinking about Mrs. Reynolds. Before she was a wanted criminal living on my property, she was a retired teacher. Before that, she was my teacher. High school history and civics. Not that I was a good student. I skipped class a lot to avoid her death ray stare. Now I get her death ray stare over breakfast. I got the biggest trigger, the one that was practically PTS, from the corner of 5th and Main, where Arnie got arrested for speeding and set off all the events that led up to the congressman being exiled to fairy time and the Morrises and Mrs. Reynolds getting sprung from jail. And I killed a guy. My life is divided into before murder and after murder. A fall from grace, as Mrs. Reynolds says. She's religious. Life has a way of getting even with people. To balance things out for the murder, I had to keep a low profile and fake being normal because of being stuck supporting the Morrises and Mrs. Reynolds until they either died of old age or I died of overwork. Hiding fugitives wasn't easy, but I had some systems set up, and I had a few people I trusted. Taylor was one, but that was complicated. A boy meets girl and murders someone and loses girl, but is still friends story. I trusted Arnie because he'd been in my thrall for years, and I trusted Elaine, another human I'd known all my life. Elaine was my destination for my trip to town. We were old lovers. Back in the day, Elaine and I had a sometimes on, sometimes off love affair. Or lust affair. We liked each other, but she was 10 years older than me, educated and a professional, while I was a trickster. Most nature spirits survive out in the battered remains of nature, holding on as best they can, but some, like me, live more or less as humans and survive by using our magic to trick people. I do a lot of what we call glamoring. I can get into someone's head and mess with their thoughts. It's a big help for shoplifting and playing poker. When Elaine and I were lovers, I was getting by with a combination of odd jobs, rental income from my resort, and cheating people with the glamour. Elaine had wanted a more steady kind of guy. It's sad that she never got what she wanted. I never told her that I was a nature spirit. In my whole life, I've only told Arnie, Taylor, the Morrises, and Mrs. Reynolds. Charlie. That's it. No one else. My mother was a full wild hair fairy, and she really hammered it into me that humans were not trustworthy. She said that humans feared what they didn't understand and hated what they feared. So yeah, me and Elaine had some awesome sex, but I never let her in on my real life. All those memories barged into my head as I pulled into the parking lot behind the pharmacy. I turned off the truck engine and just sat for a moment to get my head back into the present. Then I jerked the truck door open and set off around the side of the building to the front door. The pharmacy was one of the few businesses left on Bear Lake's Main Street. Most of the buildings were red brick and dated back to the late 1800s, but Elaine's pharmacy was in a shabby old cottage with a big front porch. She lived upstairs. I found Elaine queening it over her domain from her front door, surrounded by her cats who were flopped out in the sun, exhausted by their hard lives as house pets. Elaine nodded a greeting at me and stepped aside. Back in the day, she'd been sexy in a bouncy, overflowing way, but the years had not been kind. "Hey," I said. I didn't ask how she was doing because I sort of knew she wasn't well, so why rub it in? She snorted and jerked her head, an invitation to enter. I clumped up the steps. I was so tired that it was like climbing a mountain. She gave me a sideways glance full of irony. The interior of the pharmacy was dusty, dark, and messy. As part of my disguise as a normal person, I bought a granola bar. She rang up my bill on a noisy old-fashioned cash register that clicked, chirped, and pinged. "Your stuff is out back," she told me. "Thanks." I picked up my granola bar, turned, and caught sight of a teenage girl with a head full of curly black hair. She ducked back out of sight and I froze. I'd seen her before, of course. I even know who she was, but the sight of her always triggered a lot of guilt. A strange clicking noise brought me back to reality. Elaine was drumming her inch-long fingernails on the counter. I got a big shipment of diapers in for you. The corner of her mouth jerked up with grim humor. Since she owned the business, she gave me price breaks. I just covered her costs, non-profit. And no, the diapers weren't for me. I cleared my throat and tried to act like I hadn't just seen my secret child. Thanks. I appreciate it. I was still off-center about the kids, so I just gave Elaine a nod, got ready to leave. She tapped me on the arm with one finger and jerked her head toward the door. I gotta warn you about something. Thank you.